Chapter 7 Pirates in the Many Kingdoms. After several months or more of travel, the Jolly Roger finally arrived in the Many Kingdoms. As they sailed past the lighthouse of the gods and made their way to Morningstar Harbor, James gasped at its beauty. Nothing could have prepared him for the massive stone lighthouse that housed the magnificent jewel in its tower, or the Cyclopean castle built in the same fashion that shone behind it in the sunlight like a magic star. Starlights had shared many stories with James about the many kingdoms as they made their journey there, making James all the more eager to get there and see this magical place for himself. All around the castle was a field of golden flowers that seemed to emanate a light of their own, making the castle look even more brilliant. Skylight said these flowers weren't always in Morningstar Kingdom. When Blackbeard had visited the many kingdoms years before, they had only seen them in a place called the Deadwoods, but that was long before the Odd Sisters claimed it as their home. In all of his reading, James had never read about the many kingdoms, so he was happy that Skylight shared what Blackbeard had told him over their years pirating together. If Morningstar was an example of the kingdoms he would come across in this land, he was sure it would make a worthy adventure. "Are you sure about this, Master James?" asked Smee. "The way Skylights tells it, these witches sound like foul creatures, not the sort one should get mixed up with." Smee seemed, in James's estimation, much more at home on a pirate ship than he had been a year ago. He seemed to command some respect from the crew, especially since James had become captain, and by all accounts took on the role of James's first mate without James officially giving him the title. But that was just fine with James. Smee was allowed to take these liberties. He had taken care of James since he was a boy. Who better to be his right-hand man? And who better to share his lifelong dream? "Don't worry, Smee. I'll be fine. Though I am counting on you to keep an eye on the crew. I don't want them leaving the ship and wandering the many kingdoms. None of them dare leave the ship, sir. They're all too frightened. Skylights has been filling their heads with terrible stories about these lands," said Smee, squinting his eyes to see if he could make out anyone on the turrets of Morningstar Castle. "Skylight says the kingdom of Morningstar is peaceful, Smee. There is no need to fear this place," said James. "But what of the Tree Lords, sir, or the Cyclopean giants? There is an immortal queen here, rumored to rule these beasts." Smee looked around nervously, trying to catch a glimpse of her golden hair and fair face. "Skylights told me of Queen Tulip and King Popinjay. They sound like adventurous sorts, who are far too busy to deal with the likes of us. By Skylight's account, Morningstar has been welcoming sailors for more years than history recollects. I assure you we are in no danger here," said James. The fact was, this place intrigued James. He was fascinated by all the stories Skylights had told him, and if he wasn't Hades bent on getting to Neverland, this would be just the sort of place he'd like to explore and learn more about. As it was, Skylights had given him quite the history on their long journey there. By all accounts, Queen Tulip seemed like an amazing woman, someone James would be honored to meet. If the stories Blackbeard shared with Skylights were true, James could think of no other monarch in his land or in any other that surpassed his bravery and perseverance. James was astounded that this place had managed to capture his imagination almost as vividly as Neverland had. An immortal queen who was once betrothed to an evil man who was cursed to become a beast, who treated her so poorly she threw herself off the cliffs only to be saved by a sea witch. James had heard no tale as harrowing or inspiring as hers. The way she not only mended her broken heart, but became the woman she was always meant to be, strong, brave, and protecting these lands from evil with the help of giant trees who could walk and talk. This was the stuff of legends. This was a woman worthy of great respect. He wished he could meet her, but his desire to reach Neverland was even more compelling than Queen Tulip's saga. At the moment, my only desire and obstacle is finding these witches. Blackbeard said they would sense my coming here, but so far I have seen no sign of them, said James, as a delicate black crow circled and cawed overhead. I wouldn't be so sure of that, said Skylights, joining Smee and James and pointing at the crow. That, sir, is one of their minions. Her name is Opal, and she is a tricky little devil. She once belonged to the Dark Fairy, who ravaged these lands with fire and heartbreak. Some say the Dark Fairy refused to pass into the mist when she died, and can come back into her dragon form to set the lands ablaze again, and again to punish those who took her daughter from her. This made Smee even more nervous. Smee's eyes were now searching the sky for dragons. James shook his head. Did Blackbeard tell you this, Skylights? Dragons indeed, said James, scoffing. Indeed he did, sir. All these stories are in his book of fairy tales. It's in the chest he gave you before we departed, the floating boneyard, the one with the eye. He didn't tell me what was in his chest, James said, remembering when Blackbeard had handed it over to him before they made their way to the floating boneyard. Don't open this chest, James. Not until you are well away from these lands and safely in Neverland. And no matter how tempted, do not open it while you are in the many kingdoms. Trust me, James, the Odd Sisters would do anything to get their hands on what's inside this chest. But I have long paid the price for taking these treasures, and they are my most prized possessions. Now they belong to you. Are you sure you don't want to give them to me, sir? Or are you sure you want to give them to me, sir? I won't need them where I'm going, James. Now go. Find the life you always wanted to live. James hadn't even thought about opening the chest. His friend had told him not to, but he liked knowing he had something the Odd Sisters wanted if it came to it. Just then, Opal swooped down, landing beside James. She stretched out her little leg, offering it to him so he could remove the scroll attached. She gave a soft caw and bowed her head as she took off, her wings glistening in the sunlight, reflecting blue and purple highlights in her black feathers. It's from the Odd Sisters, said James, reading the scroll. It looks as if I'm invited to tea with them in the Dead Woods this evening. They've instructed me to pick up a cake on my way, he said, laughing. How powerful can these witches be if they can't conjure themselves their own cake? Skylights cringed at the sound of their name. It was clear these Odd Sisters evoked fear in almost everyone, even Blackbeard. So perhaps James was being a bit too cavalier, but he couldn't help it. Shh! They're probably listening, sir. Don't speak ill of the dreaded three. They have eyes and ears everywhere. Skylights looked around as if he expected to see them lurking behind every corner. Don't be ridiculous, man, James said. Smee, find me something suitable to wear. I want to look the gentleman for these strange sisters. They're called the Odd Sisters, sir. And what, pray tell, is a suitable outfit for an afternoon tea with witches? Asked Smee. My finest suit, of course, with the black morning coat and my top hat, James said, thinking of what a fine figure he will cut for the ladies. Yes, Smee, I think that will do nicely. As much as he loved his pirate garb, he quite liked the idea of changing things up and putting on a good show for these witches of the Deadwoods. If you say so, sir, said Smee, rolling his eyes. If it's good enough for tea with the Queen, it's good enough for the Weird Sisters, said James. They're called the Odd Sisters, sir, said Smee, making James laugh. Smee tottered off to get his suit ready. Now, where to find a cake, said James, looking at the map Blackbeard had given him and wondering what the rest of this day would bring.